At 7:30 on the morning of October 24, 1944, Commander David McCampbell stepped onto the flight deck of USS Essex as the Pacific sun rose over the Philippine Sea. The air was already warm, heavy with fuel fumes and salt. McCampbell was 34 years old, commander of Air Group 15, and one of the most experienced fighter pilots in the U.S. Navy. He had 25 confirmed aerial victories to his name, more than most pilots would achieve in an entire war. As he climbed into the cockpit of his F-6F-5 Hellcat, a radar operator came running across the deck, waving a report that would change the course of the morning. Japanese aircraft were inbound, not a few, not a patrol. 60 enemy planes were racing toward the American carrier task force east of the Philippines. McCampbell had been in his ready room moments earlier when the alarm sounded. October 24th was the opening day of the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest naval engagement ever fought. Across hundreds of miles of ocean, American and Japanese fleets were maneuvering for position. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and carriers were converging in what both sides understood could decide the war in the Pacific. Every available American aircraft was already airborne or being refueled. Essex had only 7 Hellcats ready on deck. 7 fighters against 60 incoming Japanese aircraft. The numbers were brutal. U.S. Navy doctrine demanded a 3-to-1 advantage to attack successfully. The Japanese were coming in with nearly 9-to-1 odds. Air Group 15 had already paid a heavy price in the previous months. 11 pilots lost in just 90 days of combat. McCampbell knew every name. He had written the letters home himself. Lieutenant Morrison shot down over Formosa. Ensign Caldwell killed during the Manila strikes. Lieutenant Commander Harris missing after the Taiwan raids. The Japanese were throwing everything they had left at the American fleet, and experienced American pilots were becoming harder to replace. Essex was exposed. Other carriers in Task Group 38.3 had launched their patrols, but those fighters were spread thin across 60 miles of ocean. As McCampbell settled into his cockpit, his plane captain strapped him in and pulled the shoulder harness tight. McCampbell glanced at the fuel gauge. Half tanks. Not enough time to top off. The Japanese formation was 22 miles out, closing fast. At their speed, they would reach weapon release range in 6 minutes. His Hellcat carried 6.50 caliber Browning machine guns, 400 rounds per gun, 2,400 rounds total. Beneath him, the Pratt & Whitney R-2800 engine came alive, 2,000 horsepower shaking the aircraft. Across the deck, 6 other Hellcats were spinning up. Lieutenant Roy Rushing taxied into position beside him. Lieutenant Hayes, Lieutenant Johnson, 3 more pilots being shoved forward by deck crews, 7 against 60. McCampbell was the air group commander. The decision was his. The tactical manual was clear. Never split your fighters when outnumbered. But the manual assumed you had more than 7 airplanes. McCampbell didn't. The radar plot updated. 60 contacts, 40 fighters in loose escort, 20 dive bombers in the center. The bombers were the real threat. One bomb through Essex's flight deck would kill hundreds and cripple American air operations for months. But the fighters would tear apart any Hellcat that tried to reach the bombers without first dealing with the escort. McCampbell made his decision as the wheel chocks were pulled. He pointed to 5 pilots and gestured toward the southern quadrant. "Attack the bombers!" Then he looked at Rushing and tapped his own chest. The 2 of them would take the fighters, 2 Hellcats against 40 Japanese aircraft. McCampbell released the brakes and shoved the throttle forward. His Hellcat surged down the deck and lifted into the humid air. Rushing followed 30 seconds later. They climbed hard, 3,000 feet, 6,000, 10,000. The Japanese formation was 15 miles ahead and slightly below. Dark specks against the blue water, 60 enemy aircraft, 2 American fighters. McCampbell armed his guns and checked his fuel again. Half tanks, maybe 90 minutes if he was careful. He climbed to 20,000 feet, putting altitude, speed, and gravity on his side. The Japanese were still at 12,000 feet, steady course toward the carriers. Rushing slid into position 500 yards back and to the right, standard two-plane element, leader and wingman. They had flown this pattern dozens of times over the Solomons and the Marianas. Attack from altitude. Use speed to survive. The Japanese fighters below were mostly Mitsubishi A-6M0s, fast and maneuverable. McCampbell knew their strengths. Below 14,000 feet, Zeros could outturn and outclimb a Hellcat. But the Hellcat was heavier, 2,000 pounds heavier. In a dive, weight became velocity. Velocity became destruction. McCampbell rolled into a steep 60-degree dive. Airspeed climbed past 300 knots, then 350, then 400. The formation filled his gun sight. He picked a straggler slightly behind the main group, the weakest link. At 800 yards, he centered the sight. 600, 400. The Zero pilot never looked up. McCampbell squeezed the trigger. 6 machine guns roared. Tracers arced through the sky. The Zero's right wing disintegrated. The aircraft rolled over and spiraled toward the ocean 4 miles below. First kill. He pulled up hard, 4 Gs crushing him into the seat. The Hellcat's wings flexed but held. Rushing was already climbing beside him. His wingman had destroyed another Zero using the same attack. 2 down, 58 left. The Japanese formation exploded into chaos. Fighters scattered in every direction. McCampbell rolled again, picked another Zero climbing to meet him. A fatal mistake. The Hellcat had superior power at altitude. He dove. The Zero erupted in flame. No parachute. Second kill. The battle settled into a rhythm. Dive, fire, climb, repeat. Third kill at 7:52, fourth at 7:56. Fuel burned fast during the climbs. The main tank dropped to a quarter. He switched to auxiliary. Rushing stayed glued to him, firing short, disciplined bursts. Smart flying. Fifth kill at 8:03, a Chi-43 Oscar. Lighter, less armored. It came apart instantly. Sweat soaked McCampbell's flight suit. His shoulders ached from the G-forces. Cordite filled the cockpit. Sixth kill, 7th. The Japanese formation was finished. Survivors were running west toward Luzon. McCampbell checked his ammo. Less than 400 rounds left. Rushing pulled alongside and made a slashing motion across his throat. Out of ammunition. Completely dry. McCampbell had a choice. Escort Rushing home or press the attack. Japanese fighters were still airborne. He pointed downward. Rushing nodded and followed. A Hellcat without ammo looked no different from one fully loaded. The Japanese wouldn't know until too late. McCampbell caught his 8th target in a climbing turn. The Zero pilot tried a head-on merge. McCampbell rolled inverted, pulled through, came out behind him and fired a short burst. The cockpit shattered. 8th kill. One more to make history. His engine began to run rough. Cylinder head temperatures climbed into the red. He had been at combat power for 40 minutes straight. At 8:40, he spotted a lone Zero running for home. McCampbell dove one last time. At 200 yards, he fired his final burst. The Zero's engine seized, smoke pouring out as it fell into the clouds. 9th kill, 9 aircraft destroyed in one mission. An American record. Only then did McCampbell key the radio. He reported 9 confirmed kills. The operator asked him to repeat. He did. Then he checked his fuel gauge. Empty main tank. 1/8 auxiliary. 30 minutes at best. He had chased the enemy nearly 100 miles from the fleet. The math didn't work. He throttled back and turned east, gliding home on fumes.